if you want to make marketing really pragmatic and really something that works, then you have to move along with it. And today, digital is what is making the consumer so dynamic.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back with another episode of Brand Masters, and today I have two very senior marketers with me, Trupti Bhandari and Arvind Bhandari. Welcome to the interview.
Hello.
So, with about 45 years of experience between them, Trupti and Arvind have just released their new book, or rather, a guide on marketing in India, Pragmarketism, which promises to be a whole new marketing approach combining Indianism, Pragmatism, and digitalism. Based on Indian sensibilities and the practical experience of the authors, this book will be a step-by-step guide that offers unprecedented insights and alternative paradigms for winning the digitally evolving Desi consumer. Trupti is a marketer with more than 23 years of experience across FMCG, healthcare, and lifestyle in blue chip companies like Reckitt Benckiser, Pfizer, Bausch & Lomb, and GSK Consumer Healthcare. She has had the opportunity to build and grow iconic brands such as Dettol, Horlicks, Boost, Crocin, Sensodyne, Eno, Listerine, Gelusil, catering to a diverse audience in different life stages. These are all brands that most of us are very familiar with. Arvind is an executive vice president and director at Nestle India. He's a corporate veteran with over 23 years of work experience. He has served in leading organizations like ITC, JWT, PepsiCo, and Nestle across the South Asia and South Africa region. He has held senior leadership roles, building successful businesses and nurturing classical brands like Maggi, Lay's, Pepsi, Everyday, Milkmaid, to name a few. He has to his credit some iconic campaigns like Pepsi's Mera Number Kab Aayega and Lay's No One Can Eat Just One. So, guys, this question is really for both of you. Tell us about your inspiration. What made you formalize all these years of experience into one book?
Husband, wife, same profession means endless discussions every day on things we do, and often not very pleasant. Then one day we got around to thinking that even though we have different companies and experiences, we do have some commonalities. And then we started to draw the commonalities and the differences, and we realized there were quite a few things that we were thinking and realizing which may not be visible, and especially to people who come into to workplace straight from campus, what they are missing, and how we could actually fast track their learning from the mistakes we made. So we realized, there was something to tell, because the book that we were wanting to read was not really in the market, and we had a lot to tell the world. So we got together and we kind of covered all the marketing structures, and then we tried to improvise with what we could do better. And hence the name Pragmarketism. We said we can actually improvise. We can give practical tools that really work in the marketplace, because theoretical stuff is aplenty, but not a lot is used in the real life. And then, of course, the models that you learn from the West are very, very based on Western sensibilities, whereas the Indian market is very unique. How do you actually serve the Indian market with new models? And lastly, the whole digital space, Roudra, it's evolving so rapidly. How do we really make it work for the new consumer? Because we are classical marketers and the world is changing rapidly. How do you synthesize the two to make a really effective marketing campaign in the times to come? So that was really the inspiration.
Also, we found that most marketers get the experience of working in one or two or max three industries, and there is a rich experience lying everywhere. So we thought, how about getting everything together so that, you have a lot to learn from another industry. And many a times the fundamentals of marketing don't change, but the way it is applied changes. And if you can look at an example from an alternate industry, like a retailer studying from a pharma industry, an FMCG person studying from an e-commerce industry, I think that really gives rich solutions, and they will be very innovative and different from what has been used earlier. So the effort of the book was also to bring together various industries and see what are the commonalities and differences which can then drive solutions.
This is really interesting. What you mentioned about the Western concepts and how they are applied to India. The five forces of Potter, etc. Those won't really change, right? But the way they impact and interact with the Indian consumer is something very unique. And all these years of experience, these are big brands. Pepsi, Frito-Lay, Nestle, and I'm sure there's so much, the wealth of experience and the amount invested behind these brands is so large. So there are great stories to tell out there. Specific to you, Trupti, I mean, you've been in the healthcare pharma space and FMCG, right? How are these two industries different in their approach to the customer?
I think fundamentally the marketing principles are not different. It is about identifying the right consumer need and then designing the solution which meets that need in the most optimum way. So that's similar. However, I feel the way one approaches and the way one communicates these needs are slightly different in the FMCG space and in the healthcare space. So, for instance, if you take an FMCG brand like a Horlicks or a Boost, where the emotional angle of appealing to the consumers plays a far bigger role. And while science is important, in healthcare it becomes a hygiene. So you really need to explain how your product works, what are the rational benefits. Whereas in the FMCG space, I think emotion takes a step over the rational benefit. And if you can appeal to the consumer's mind, then everything else follows. So I think that is the biggest difference I found in the way we designed our communication. At the same time, I think the packaging, again, it is important to have the best packaging in both the cases. But I think the appeal of the packaging, sometimes in the case of FMCG, has to be to multiple consumers because the buyer and the user may be different. So you may have, again, if I come to Horlicks, where the buyer is the mom, but the user is the child. The product needs to appeal to the child, but also it needs to be very much for the mom as well, because she's the one who's going to make the final decision. She's the gatekeeper. Whereas in the healthcare industry, I think it is a little more transactional. So it is more, the functional benefits are important, both of the packaging as well as product. And that's how one needs to design the entire package.
Arvind, coming to you, I mean, you've spent many years in the FMCG space, right? I mean, long known as a mecca for marketing that every other industry is sort of looking at. Why do you think FMCG has this halo among marketers? You see, senior marketers from FMCG, making lateral moves to different sectors, and this is very, very common. Why is it FMCG has this space?
That's very interesting because everybody you come across wants to be in FMCG, like you said. And it has to do with a few things. You see, marketing is essentially about understanding consumer need. The core of marketing comes from understanding consumer need. Consumer need of things like chips and biscuits and edible oils and so on is fairly intense, as compared to consumer need of an earth moving equipment. I mean, just to give you a comparison. So the intensity, the affinity that you have to get into of that category in the consumer's mind is fairly intense. So you need to understand that piece very well. Then the sheer scale of the whole brand journey, which is to give a value to a consumer, is very elaborate in the FMCG. From the time you design the product to the way you communicate it. Remember, it's usually very frequently consumed, An FMCG is fast moving consumer goods. Basically, that means the consumer interactions are high. So your level of delivery mechanism of value, which is what brands are all about, to the consumer needs to be fairly intense at every point, whether it's making it, packaging it, advertising it, supplying it. I mean, look at FMCG. A Unilever brand, a P&G brand, Nestle brand goes to millions of outlets. So the whole mechanism, the value chain creation behind that is very intense. And if you understand the 5-day cricket match, you can play the 1 day, right? So you need to be playing this game very intense, play it in detail. And then every other industry is a sub-segment of it, almost as it were. But it is not easy, therefore, to migrate from a durable or from a industrial selling into a mainstream consumer marketing, because the mainstream consumer marketing is a far more intense and far more broad spectrum an area. And of course, it deals with consumer need very intricately. So if you pick up those fundamentals early on, you can apply them very well in other industries.
A bit about your book. Why the name Pragmarketism? Trupti, maybe you could.
So we actually, this took a bit of a time, for us to get the title, because we thought earlier, of brand names, of names like the Personal MBA or the Indian MBA, because it is actually a marketing guide and it covers all the steps very elaborately. But then we said that we want to write this book because we are bridging these main 3 gaps. The first gap being that Western theories are getting used, Western frameworks are getting used, Western examples are getting used for the Indian consumer who's so deeply rooted in the Indian cultural realities. So the Indianism part is really important when you want to understand how to market to an Indian consumer. The second gap that we thought was, most of the books are written by theoreticians, not practitioners. And theoreticians do not really understand the real challenges that are there in the business world. So, how do you get the practical aspect of the problem and the solutions of the practical solutions? That's something that we've really written through every chapter of the book, with examples, with our own examples as well as industry examples. And thirdly, the consumer is so dynamic. So if you want to make marketing really pragmatic and really something that works, then you have to move along with it. And today digital is what is making the consumer so dynamic, but digital really scares people. There is a big mystery about digital. So how do you demystify that? So that was the content of the book, and we said really to do justice to it, we need to coin a currency, which becomes like a marketing approach. And that's when we thought of pragmatism, which is pragmatic marketing, which is a combination of all of these: Indianism, practical working, dynamism, digitalism. And that's why the name, a little bit of a tongue twister, but I think it's got a character
Yeah, I
of its
think
own.
it's got a good ring to it. It's a good name. So, Arvind, would you want to add to that? Or
If you look at it, how do you really grow in your profession? You work with a senior, you get hands-on learning, you burn your hands, you learn a few things. And your theoretical learning, which comes from MBA campus, is really a structure which you refer to now and then, but it's actually, as you go along, a smaller part of what you really need to be good at to succeed. But there is no way to learn it. You've got to work with somebody, you've got to spend the years, you have to be lucky to be in the right industry, right line manager. But what if this was possible to condense into a 300-page from various people on various brand experiences? So you could therefore sort of scan an experience of many, many brands, many people. Of course, when we talk, we include experience of our peers and seniors. And what you effectively get from there is like a real life example of having fought the war from the trenches, but never having gone there. So we kind of fill the gap of knowing what it takes to matter in the marketplace very quickly, very early on. So you have an advantage when you really hit work, because really work is based on experiential learning, which is not easy to capture in a book, which is what we contribute in the pragmatic approach to marketing.
So the book focuses on desi sensibilities, right? Tell us maybe the three top traits of the Indian consumer that sets him apart from other markets. You might have mentioned some in the book. Maybe you mentioned 10. I'm just asking for 3, so it's not giving away to.
We're very, very typical species on the planet. We're very typical. So the book is therefore quite stretched in terms of its scope. And what we've done before starting the whole exercise on learning marketing in the theoretical way, the Kotler way, is we've seen the Indian consumer first. So our first chapter is about Indian society. And we said we need to understand that the Indian consumer is fundamentally a different animal. 3 things that set him out to answer your question specifically. We are fundamentally a very hierarchical society. Indians love to rank. आम फलों का राजा है, शेरों जंगल में शेर राजा है, number 1 कौन है क्लास में. It is a very fundamental part of our DNA, and it has been examined by sociologists as a fundamental fabric of Indian social system. It's called hierarchy. We need to reflect hierarchy in the way we think of consumers. It's a very theoretical argument, but we've given examples how to use it in communication and innovation and so on. The second aspect is the Western consumer is an individual. He comes to you with a social class at best. But the Indian consumer is a very complex animal. He comes to you from a caste system. He comes to you from a holistic family, a joint family, a jati, and a community network. So an Indian is not an individual. He's a member of a community, which is the other thing that sets him apart. So I would call that holism. So hierarchy is ranking. Holism is the understanding of the Indian individual as a part of the group. So to give you an example, a lady is not just a lady. She's a mom. She's a mom-in-law, and she's a wife. So when you talk to a lady with respect to a category, you have to understand what role of hers are you talking about, and who all do you need to include in her consideration. Because unlike the West, a lady is not just a lady who's being spoken of in her own right. So that's the second aspect, holism. And the third aspect is what we call continuity, which is Indians tend to think of anything in a very holistic way. They tend to go around. So our cause and effect of everything is very elaborate. If you fall in the West, you just fall, you have an injury. If you fall in the East, there is a karma behind which is driving it. And there's a karma to follow the way you tackle the injury and so on. So our model of life, our model of social change is very circular. Now, if you understand these three, I broadly touched upon three, to your point, 3 theoretical underpinnings to our behavior, then you can actually evolve models and reflect those of the consumer sensibilities in your consumer thinking, which is currently missing because ours is fundamentally an adaptation of the Western model of the class system, which is not true of the caste system, if I was to just draw back.
Okay.
So we started with that fundamental difference in the Indian consumer versus the Western consumer, and then we've given examples on how to leverage that typical Indian psyche to be able to better sync with his mindset and to appeal to the larger audience, which is the way the market is evolving now with vernacular and so on.
The other question is, so there are few marketing innovations that you could maybe identify that have sort of come from Indian companies and that have had sort of a long-lasting and a significant impact on the consumer goods industry. Which are these that you know maybe not only one company but others have also sort of followed? One thing that widely comes to my mind is the small ticket packaging of small sachet shampoos, etc. You know those things. But I'm not from the industry. You would have a much better other things. What are these innovations that you could maybe
So
talk
actually, Roudra, we've tackled quite a few. I mean, our theoretical understanding is that when innovations come to India from the West, they either get exactly the way it is, so like an Apple iPhone, exactly the way it is in the world it is here. It gets adapted. So you have a submersible pump, which becomes a vehicle in the rural parts, which is an adaptation. Or it goes through a fusion so much that you don't know what is the original looking like. The latest example being a Jaguar bathroom fitting, which gives you a balti effect. So you get the pour of a balti or a bucket. And that is modification. Yeah, it's actually quite a cool innovation. So we've talked about a lot of these. Successful Indian innovation that I can think of, and we have quite a few in the book. Kurkure is a very good example of a Western snack idea adapted to Indian sensibility. So if you look at the Indian consumption of savory namkeens, it is a palmful, and we go like that. What Kurkure has done is actually it's converted the palmful into the finger food, and it's given the experience of a namkeen or a savory. So you've got the familiar experience of a masala taste, the texture and bite of a namkeen, a bhujia or whatever you call it. But it also has the easy hold or a bite of a Cheetos, which is very popular in the West. And this fusion has worked so well for us, Roudra. I was in the company that even before we could mount the marketing plan, this was already a rage. An example of a very good success based on understanding the Indian market and mounting a product for India specifically, which then went on to become a rage in UK. So it was an example of a reverse innovation. There are various ways of adapting, modifying, or even recreating a fresh solution. I mean, the way we do nariyal ka tel, as means to grooming, is amazing. I mean, the category only exists in India, or a Simcoe beard fixer, which is such a popular thing in upcountry Punjab. So we have a few peculiarities, but when we understand the consumer right, as I said, the core is getting the need right. The solutions follow and the success is a certainty.
What about global companies in India? I mean, some have done really well, right? I mean, there are some companies that have traditionally understood the Indian consumer, come up with adaptations of global products or come up with local products. So they have thrived, but some have been really struggling. So what is that key ingredient in those companies which have thrived and those companies which have sort of tried really hard several times, but still not been able to break it? I can give names, but we don't want to give names right now, so that's not a fair thing to do. But what is that ingredient? And you must have done some research for the book to figure out, okay, this is why these guys are not maybe working in India.
I mean, look at it. I'll give you an example of the cuff, and this is partially in the book, but being specific to your question. The cereal category in India has never taken off. I mean, Kellogg's has been there for a while, and they've done an amazing job on marketing. But because it is not close to consumer consumption of breakfast, which is hot, whereas the Western consumption of cereal is cold.
Right.
There is an association of nutrition codes which are not there in the cold category. The way we have it, the mother's assurance intervention, all those are missing. And you contrast that with the Maggi noodle, which is a noodle from the West, and it's such a rage. When I mentioned Maggi noodles, you had a thing, I'm sure, up your throat and your associations of many kinds, because all of us have grown up on that. So if you kind of look at these two, just to answer your question very specifically, in one case you kind of transplanted the Western experience and your success was moderate, even questionable. In the other case, you took the idea, then you modified with the flavors, with the whole aspect of the cooking, which is so important to a mother when she's giving out food to her children, to her family. And this whole innovation, which is such an amazing fusion, and it's such a success. So, I mean, without going into the specifics again, I think the heart of the issue really is that if you're able to understand your product, if you're taking from the West, but you try and bring it very close to the consumer need of India, and almost ruthlessly having to modify it, to refashion it if you need to, but be close to the consumer need, then you have a chance to succeed. But if you just take it and implant on Indian consumer, I think there's a high chance to succeed because our sensibilities are different, our requirements are different. Only in the space of technology, maybe where consumer needs are somewhat more universal, does it work? But even look at it now. Even the software and the phones will evolve now to reflect the Indian realities with the high amount of vernacular usage and even the usage of feature phones in the less prosperous areas. So that market is still true.
So just to give you one example, from my personal experience, when we got Sensodyne to India, we actually struggled for almost 3 or 4 years to be able to get the right product and package out. And one of the key things was because though Sensodyne is a global brand, and typically it is marketed as well as the product is pretty uniform across the globe. But when it came to India, there were certain things which held us back. Like the Indians love foaming toothpaste. Unless there's a lot of foam, you don't think that it's cleaning enough. Whereas Sensodyne was not that. So we had to really modify the product to suit, and that took a little bit of time which means that you are changing the actual product, which is a global product. The second thing was the communication. Internationally, the communication is where the dentist. It's a very in the clinic kind of on your face dentist communication. But in India, the rules were different because you're not allowed to take a dentist into the communication. As per Indian policies. So how do you tackle that? So then does emotional work or do you have to take a dentist? So those things had to be looked at. We wanted to take a dentist, so then we had to work out ways like taking UK dentists and stuff like that. But there were a whole lot of things that you need to, the 4 Ps, if that everyone is familiar with, had to be really altered in the Indian context. And today it's one of the most successful brands. It's about 800 crores and has a reasonable market share in the industry.
What about the reverse now? Indian brands looking to go global, successful in India, and there are many of the brands that have been doing very well in India and have adopted all of the other sort of best practices in terms of efficient manufacturing processes, etc., etc. And now they're looking to sort of take their products globally. What is your advice to them? These sort of brands.
This is a tough animal, and we've had some success, some failures. A lot of the success happens to be because you eventually sell to the Indian consumers outside. So let's be a little wary. Selling to Indian consumers outside is only a geography change. It's not selling to a foreign consumer. In our book, we discussed the Tata Slim Watch, the Titan Slim Watch, which was Desai's dream, and a lot of effort behind that to create, in my view, one of the most fine pieces of engineering. I was with the company for a short while, so I had direct hands-on experience, and it flopped because the understanding of Indian as a market for chronometers, compared that to the Swiss, is just not there. So you suffer from a country image. Brand marketing is so fine. Compared with Singapore Airlines, when they launched their airlines, they actually worked on because they recognized that Singapore was not seen to be the front cutting edge on hospitality. They actually built that in their program and they built it up. So success of Indian companies outside, really very few examples, honestly. But let's say if you look at the liquor industry, where our wines have gone, and of course the liquor has gone, whiskey is gone. I think if you are playing on the story of provenance, on the land of mystique which India has to foreigners by and large, there is something there which you can latch on to, and there is a market there clearly. I mean, yoga is India's best export. And what an export. So it may have to start with what India has understood for first, before we can try and strike a counter stereotype, because that is often a little more difficult to task. So if India is for naturality, is for tradition, is for Ayurveda, then those kind of products, or organic, which is such a rage, or A2 milk, there are many things which are coming from East and going to West. If India goes in one of those territories, then the sheer fact of belonging to India will give it a head start and will take brands further. Today, there are many examples, and we are. I mean, Dabur is selling stuff in Africa. Marico is selling like coconut oil and so on. But they still tend to be a little more our kind of consumers, and we haven't got to a new set of consumers. I think we need to latch on to the new categories, the new trends of organic, naturality, slow living, mind and space, things which India is known for, and bring products there where we have a credibility. Then maybe we can get to, IT solutions are there where TCS is doing such a wonderful job. So I think we'll have to play on what we are known for, because cultural stereotypes have a big role to play in consumer adoption of categories. And then we can start to move our way around. But that is still to happen, in my view. And of course, the vision of Indian companies, which I've discussed in the first chapter, and we've got many examples there, is actually very, very limited. So it does not help them spread the wings really. I mean, if you compare to an Apple or Google, what companies, what vision, and what inspiration? By comparison, our companies are a lot more blinkered. So many things to say there. But along with...
Yeah. I mean, you were, I thought you maybe have a point to add. I think you were nodding at that point. So I thought.
Yeah, actually, I was going to talk about the vision part which he covered, because yes, we did evaluate the vision of some 15 odd companies, and we put that down. And you really find that most of the times the vision the Indian companies put forward look very similar across companies, irrespective of the category they work in, irrespective of the geography they are in. So, whereas if you look at some of the Western examples like a Disney or a Google, first of all, the consumer is at the heart, and therefore there is a lot more touch and feel value to the vision, which is missing in Indian vision. And I think everything starts from the vision. If you have a vision which is a global vision, then you will approach the problem accordingly, and therefore you will spread out. So I think yes, that's where it starts.
True. So my last question for you. This is also a little personal. So one has seen that most of the best ideas that you have come when you're not directly thinking about the challenge or the problem at hand. It's typically when your mind is sort of distracted, but this is at the back of your head, and then you have that eureka moment. Okay, this is how we can address this. What is your take on this as a marketer, as somebody responsible for not only innovative marketing thinking, communication, etc.? What is your take on this? And it may work very differently for you. This is very open.
Look, we've discussed innovation at length. It's a very tricky animal. A lot of the marketing time goes in innovation, but the success rate is very poor. So we try to see, is there a way to template innovations? And we've looked at various models of innovation, the de bono caps to the stage gate that companies use. And then we've also looked at a few of the readings in the market, and we put our own. But to your question, it's interesting that you raise it, because the creativity goes through a cycle. First, it's called, and we mentioned that in the book. First is the point when you invest the idea in your brain, like you talk about it to yourself, and you give it a framework. Right? And if you can then step back, then what follows is called the incubation, where the brain or the subconscious makes its own connections which are not apparent to you because you think very much from the logical side. So that's where I think the left and the right brain talk to each other, the synapses fire, and unusual ideas come. And then you have the eureka moment or the enlightenment that follows afterwards, which is when you hit upon something which you hadn't thought of because you are used to what De Bono calls thinking in a certain way, which has already been set by previous patterns. So it does not give you a break from the previous obvious. And so what you said is right. A lot of the ideas come when you're off work, when you had the idea in your mind, but you left it to incubate, as we call it. Yeah, and then it comes, because creativity is often connecting what is not obvious. And then you use the blue hat, as they call it, and the yellow hat in the De Bono to filter what you need for your purpose. But you need to walk away from the problem to have many, many options. And then you bring in the logical mind to choose what you think is right. But there needs to be a withdrawal from the conscious mind.